Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Huffman. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. So now we're going to start our very last unit of this semester, Reconstruction. And this is a period that roughly lasts for about 10 years through the mid 1860s, going all the way through the 1870s. And this is really, in some ways, a more formative period, believe it or not, than the Civil War itself. While, of course, the Civil War was very important, over 500,000 lives died as a result of that Civil War. This is the period where America starts to reckon with itself. What sort of a nation is it going to be? The Union and Lincoln made the war all about abolishing slavery, in the middle of the war. And so what was once a war all about preserving the Union, what became a war about, the abolition of slavery. Now that war is over, slavery is officially abolished. Bringing that union back together is the great challenge of Reconstruction, and one that is largely a success. But there's also going to be some failures along with this period as well. That I would say has drastic effects on the kind of remaining history of racial relations, even now in modern America. Very much legacies of this Reconstruction period. So in 1865, at the war's end, it goes without saying, large areas of the former Confederacy are in tatters, are in ruins. As destructive as this war was for the Union, it was exponentially worse for that of the Confederacy. Okay. The Confederate economy, especially, is in a total state of disarray, total state of collapse. The value of land itself had fallen significantly, drastically. Confederate money was effectively worthless. Two-thirds of the transportation system no longer functioned, period. Infrastructure destroyed, such as bridges. Miles of railroad track have been twisted and rendered useless. So the South has a long way to go in terms of rebuilding itself before it can be anywhere resembling productive. Not only that, the emancipation of African Americans, while morally justified and great for them, for the South, undeniably threw its agricultural system into chaos, right? The whole Southern agricultural system was absolutely relying on slavery. So to flip a switch and get rid of slavery is naturally going to leave this huge void that they're going to have to spend a great many years rebuilding and reconsecrating if, again, they're going to be anything resembling productive. Because part of the reason their agricultural output was so significant was naturally, again, because of slave labor. They didn't have to actually pay anyone or people the wages that they deserve to do that kind of, do that labor. So now that slaves have been emancipated, this really throws into question how is the Southern economy going to rebuild itself? And naturally, many Southerners are very bitter over a Union victory, right? That they're occupied by Union troops really over the course of the next 10 years. Naturally, they're very angry. They're very bitter towards these troops. But at the same time, as angry and bitter as they are, they're ready to move on as well. They're ready to kind of say, listen, we lost this war. We're not happy we lost the war, but we're going to have to turn the page. We're going to have to do something if it means rebuilding the South in any meaningful way. Lincoln, he had some plans for what Reconstruction was going to be, right? By 1862, 63, while the war was still very much in flux, he already had an idea that the Union was going to win. And so he was already looking ahead. Okay, once we win this war, what are we going to do to try to reconsecrate these Confederate states back into the Union? Overall, he wanted a relatively moderate policy, right? That he could have been very tough, could have been very brutal, and he could have especially went after Confederates and punished them for treason. But instead, he wants to take it a little easier on the South, frankly, more than they deserved, and re-implement them in and kind of make sure that they're not too, abused, so to speak, by the Union. So he wants to reconcile Southerners. He wants to bring them back in relatively peacefully. Again, pretty moderately, considering the other people in the North, more radical Republicans, are saying we need to put these people's heads on pikes. He's taken a little bit more of a moderate approach. And in December of 1863, he even offers general amnesty, which is effectively a pardon to all Southerners who partook or took an oath of loyalty back to the United States and accepted the Union's proclamations regarding slavery. So he says, listen, if you say that I'm going to be loyal to the Union and I'm going to respect what the Union has decided with regards to slavery, then I'm going to pardon you. That's kind of common Southerners, but even also those of the kind of Confederate government, the Confederate military, whoever that might be. Okay. And he even consecrates a new law that says if up to 10% of voters in the 1860 election in the South had taken that oath, then they've been authorized by Lincoln and the Union to organize their own state government. So he realizes that this is a big kind of obstacle in his way to get a majority of Southerners on his side to kind of rebuild these state governments. So he has a pretty realistic number when he says if as many as 10% do that, then I'll allow them to reconsecrate and recreate a new state government. And so only people really, not offered pardons in some ways was those who were actually formerly a part of the Confederate government, officers in the military. They're the ones they're going to be a little bit harsher on. But even by the end of the war, you're going to see Lincoln takes that, a lot more lenient, you could say, on them than he had said in 1863. Okay. But again, there's this group of Republicans known as the Radical Republicans, and they are on the far left wing of the party. Okay, Lincoln's more in the middle. They're much more on the far left wing of the party. They are strong abolitionists. They believe vehemently that they want to abolish slavery, that they have been abolitionists for some time, and that the 13th Amendment especially is going to be something they're going to get behind. Thaddeus Stevens, representative in Pennsylvania, he's going to be a key leader of this. There he is in the film Lincoln that we watched for our A-Day kids, played by Tommy Lee Jones. Thaddeus Stevens, again, the kind of the biggest abolitionist in Congress, arguably. And he is going to be the leader of these radical Republicans, the far left wing of the Republican Party. He's from Pennsylvania, as well as Senator Charles Sumner, who was the guy who got beat in the Senate with a cane by Preston Brooks. In Massachusetts, he is going to be the leader in the Senate. So again, these radical Republicans are saying, they're pushing Lincoln even further, saying we need to be brutal on the South, and we need to make sure that abolitionism is the reason behind this. And they resist Lincoln's calls for moderation. And he says, listen, we need to revolutionize Southern institutions, Southern habits, and Southern manners. He's saying we don't need to sugarcoat it. We don't need to take it easy on these people. These people have committed a great crime against God himself in the act of slavery, so we don't need to take it easy on them. Okay? And these radical Republicans have three kind of key main goals. One, especially, they want to prevent Confederate leaders from returning to power after the war's over. They want to make sure that they just don't slide back into Congress and have kind of prominent positions again. They want them to be punished. They want them to make sure that they are not going to be given any form of power. Okay. Also, the Republican Party had long been the party of the North and in parts of the West. It had never really played competitively in the South. Okay, so this, radical Republicans say we want to get more involved in Southern politics, and we want to make sure that we're taking the Southern politics in the direction that best suits us. Okay, and they also say they want the federal government to especially go out of their way to help and to aid African Americans, especially when it comes to achieving political equality in the South, i.e., the right to vote. Okay, so they're saying that we want African Americans to have the right to vote. We want them to take prominent leadership positions, not only in the North, but also in the South as well. And these Republicans understand and realize that Southern representation in Congress is going to jump up 15 more seats in the House, which means that they need to really maximize and establish and enable protections for African American voting rights, because they know that, okay, African Americans are going to be freed by the 13th Amendment. We need to make sure that they're going to have voting rights that are protected, that are encouraged. And this is something that very, very much so is going to be a sticking point for these radical Republicans and even the more moderate and right wing of the Republican Party, and especially with the Democratic Party. So, again, these radical Republicans, they don't agree with Lincoln. They want to take a much harder, much firmer stance against the South when it comes to Reconstruction. Okay, so there is going to be a bill known as the Wade-Davis bill, and that comes about through large numbers of moderate Republicans caught in between these ideas of Lincoln and the radical Republicans. Some of them thought Lincoln's a little too lenient, but at the same time, they thought maybe the radicals are going too far when it comes to supporting African Americans. So in the summer of 1864, so this is before the 1864 election, the moderates and radical Republicans are going to agree on a bill known as the Wade-Davis bill in an attempt to kind of counteract Lincoln's own plans at this time for Reconstruction. And what is this Wade-Davis bill promoting? It's basically saying that they want a majority of adult white males in former Confederate states to take an oath of allegiance to the Union. In many ways, I would say that's a fair thing to ask. Okay. They also say that they think the states should then form new constitutional conventions, which needs to acknowledge the abolition of slavery that was originally with the um, Emancipation Proclamation and will later be backed up by the 13th Amendment. They're also saying we're going to reject all debts the state has acquired as a part of the Confederacy. And they also say they want to deprive all former Confederate government officials and or military officers the right to vote or ever hold public office. This is a big ask, right? That it's one thing to say we don't maybe want them to hold public office, even though that was going to be a big ask, but also to say they don't think they deserve the right to vote. That was going to be a lot tougher of a sale. It's going to be back to passed in Congress, but Lincoln is going to then block that with the pocket veto, where he allows the congressional session basically to expire without signing the legislation himself. In part because he believes that this is too harsh of a punishment, and he's in the process of understanding the war's kind of towards coming to an end. And again, he realizes, hey, we maybe need to be more lenient, not so strict. So again, these even more moderate, and especially the radical Republicans in the party, wanting to be very tough with this Wade Davis bill, where again they're saying majority of adult males need to be able to take an oath of allegiance to the Union. They need to have state constitutional conventions that acknowledge and support that slavery has indeed been abolished. And also, they're wanting to make sure that these Confederate officials and military officers do not have the right to vote or hold public office. And again, Lincoln blocks that, saying, I think that's a little too harsh. Okay. And so Lincoln, he's really weighing all his options. And again, I think wisely he understands if we take too harsh of a tactic with a lot of Southern whites, they're going to be much more alienated. They're going to be much more resentful. Again, these are our fellow Americans. We need to do what we can to kind of bring them back into the Union. They're already going to be facing harsh enough difficulties as it is in the economy. We need to make it easier for them to want to join back, not harder. So that's really what Lincoln was thinking. Especially, again, the war had devastated, as I said, that Southern economy, had left thousands, hundreds of thousands unemployed, homeless, hungry. And again, Lincoln understands that. And again, that's one of his big reasons why he doesn't want to be so harsh against the South. Thousands of African Americans had also fled the Confederacy to Union lines before officially they were liberated, and that really began following Sherman's troops as he marched through Georgia and South Carolina, and they were following these troops seeking food and shelter. Okay, and so that was also a strain being put on the Union Army by these African Americans who had been freed by Union troops marching through the South, and they had been following Sherman's troops and said, "Please, we need food, we need shelter. Do you have anything that you can spare for us?" Okay, so Sherman, who helped, he believed, listen, freemen should feed themselves. He's going to basically just start taking a lot of plantations out from under some of the Southern plantation owners and be giving that away to some of these free African Americans, which of course is going to anger a lot of these plantation owners. But who cares, right? They were on plantations, on slaves, so who cares what they think, right? But within a few months, Union troops had basically given over or granted as much as 40,000, basically African Americans, roughly 500,000 acres of land in both South Carolina and in Georgia. Okay, so that's going to go a long way in terms of, making sure that these, temporarily speaking, these African Americans are being taken care of on a wide stretch of land. Again, 40,000, that's not as, there's still way, 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 way many more African Americans who don't have that freedom yet. But the fact that 40,000 of them are getting granted 500,000 acres of land in South Carolina and Georgia raises the expectations on their part and other African Americans that there's going to be a lot of help on the way once this war has reached its bloody conclusion. And here are some of these African Americans who, again, were granted various kind of lands or estates for them to kind of grow and control for themselves before the war officially ended. Okay. And this really prompts this massive refugee crisis naturally, right? Where Congress is now going to have to establish some new government agency that's going to have to help take care of and implement these African Americans into traditional American life. And that is going to come in the form of the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, but it's going to get the nickname that is still remembered for today as the Freedmen's Bureau. And again, they're really going to be tasked with trying to figure out how the federal government is going to now help these freed African Americans. And they're going to play, again, a key role during Reconstruction, really offering a variety of services, especially the biggest ones, feeding and clothing these war refugees in the South, using surplus Army supplies as a way to kind of give them a slow leg up. Okay. And this really begins in earnest in September of 1865, which is, several months after the end of the war in April, where nearly 30,000 rations a day for the next year are sent to the South to really prevent a mass starvation from taking place. And this isn't just actually of freed African Americans. This is even being given to white Southerners who, frankly, just do not have any food. So the federal government stepping in and giving as many, again, as 30,000 rations a day for the whole next year. Okay. And they're also going to go out of their way to help formerly enslaved people find work on plantations and also create new labor protections, meaning that, okay, in some instances, you're working on the very same land that you would work for years and years before, but now we're going to make sure you're going to be compensated for that and that your masters are now going to be more resembling your bosses, which is going to create a whole new series of problems when it kind of comes to the attitudes of whites who had always been masters. Now they have to treat these slaves much more fairly. Okay. Also, Freedmen's Bureau is building schools, paying teachers to come down, and especially help train African American teachers, right? Because before this, if African Americans were taught at all, it was usually in secret or with really underfunded resources. These are also going to be unfortunately underfunded, but they're especially saying, hey, we need these African Americans, especially to be learning from other African Americans, because if other African Americans are becoming teachers, that is going to create a kind of a more formative idea of social mobility that over time is going to be much more substantial. Okay. And in general, kind of the former Union or Northerners are largely backing the Bureau, but some in general believe that African Americans could or should just get by with 40 acres and a mule. And that's going to be a popular saying that comes about in the North, saying, let's just give every African American family 40 acres and a mule. That'll be enough for them to figure it out, right? Of course, a lot of them had experience working on plantations, but they usually only did very specific tasks. When it comes to running a whole farm on their own or on their family's own, that's going to take a lot of training to correct that. So again, over time, white Northerners are going to get more and more frustrated, thinking, why do we still dedicate all this time to helping Southern former slaves, African Americans? 40 acres and a mule should just do it. But of course, that in and of itself is short-sighted if you think that that's going to be enough to totally change the fortunes of an entire race. Okay. And also there's a huge desire by those in the North to just seize a lot of Confederate land and then redistribute that to emancipated slaves. Others thought that this was wrong, that it violated property rights, that even the former slave owners or people who supported slavery, that is still their land, that they should be able to keep that land. And ultimately, Congress is going to reject land confiscation. One of the most fundamental American values or American moral truths is the just concept of land ownership, going all the way back to like Thomas Jefferson and kind of the 1770s, 1780s. That's such a key tenet of American core values and beliefs, even now in 2020, is the idea that you can own your own land. So that is not going to be super popular back then either. And so Congress isn't going to do a whole lot when it comes to actually confiscating huge portions of the land after the war and redistributing that to African Americans, deservingly or not. Okay. Finally, of course, Lincoln is assassinated in April of 1865, which drastically alters whatever his possibilities of Reconstruction are. Okay. Again, it wasn't even a full week before the war had officially been ended with the stroke of Robert E. Lee's pen at Appomattox. Wasn't even a full week before Lincoln was then assassinated, which, of course, really throws the nation into a state of shock. Even Southern states and Southerners who hated Lincoln, even they were shocked and questioning, what is this going to mean now? And a lot of them even realized, as much as they thought of Lincoln as Satan or the devil, Southerners, some of them, even the more clear-eyed, kind of pragmatic ones, realize, wait a minute, Lincoln's actually taking it a little bit easier on us. If these radical Republicans now run the show, they could be a lot tougher on us, okay? But thankfully for them, Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson, is now going to become president, of course, after Lincoln's assassination, and he is going to be also even more lenient than Lincoln would be, as it turns out, on the South, okay? And the big thing was, Johnson himself was a Southern Democrat before the war had began. He was from Tennessee, and he was a mayor in a state legislature, and then he was eventually elected to the Senate. But when Tennessee seceded, which again, Tennessee was a state there was a lot of debate back and forth whether or not they should secede. He decided to actually leave Tennessee, stay in the Union, and that's going to actually give him a lot of kudos and a lot of brownie points in the Union. Say, oh, this guy stuck with the Union. He actually broke away from his home state, unlike Robert E. Lee, who wanted to maybe stay with the Union but couldn't go against Virginia. It's almost the opposite here, where Johnson really wanted to maybe stay with Tennessee, but realized, you know what, I believe the Union, I should go with the Union. And so in the North, that makes him a hero over the course of the war. And then once Union troops had advanced into Tennessee relatively early on in the war in 1862, Lincoln then appoints Johnson as the military governor of the state. Okay, and so Johnson returns back to Tennessee, and the Tennesseans are actually relatively happy about this. While some of them see Johnson as a turncoat, um, they see, well, he's one of us. He's not going to be as rough on us as we think, someone else could be. Okay. Lincoln then, in 1864, flash forward a few years later, as he's running in a re-election that he's, again, as I said, not sure if he's going to win. He really hoped to get Northern Democrats on his side, so he picked, of course, a Southern Democrat in the form of Andrew Johnson as a way to placate and show, see, I'm going to be more moderate. I'm not going to go over here with these radical Republicans like you expect me to. I'm actually going to get a little bit, someone that's actually a little bit more on the other side, the right end of the political spectrum. And so just to show that he's serious about being moderate. And again, that played a key role into why Lincoln won re-election in 1864. Of course, again, Lincoln was assassinated, unfortunately, very tragically in 1865, which means now Johnson is going to be the one who's propelled into the White House, okay? And Johnson, as far as temperamentally speaking, was very different from Lincoln. He was very stubborn. He was very hot-tempered. He didn't really like taking in all the sorts of political debates of both sides, which, of course, made him very much unlike Lincoln, right? Lincoln was very moderate. He listened to the radical Republicans, but he also listened to Democrats and realized he needed to placate them. So Lincoln was one of our great moderate presidents who understood that he needed to play to both sides to get substantial legislation passed. Johnson, on the other hand, he's going to be much more kind of in favor of the Democrats, both North and South. And he thinks that Lincoln actually had a relatively moderate policy, as we've seen, but he's going to take it even more moderate to the point of just being outright lenient on the Southern states. And he believes that the Southern states need to be brought in quicker. And he's a little bit more bullish and a little bit more unsure how serious that the Union or the United States should take making these Southern states actually abide by abolition, which of course enrages the radical Republicans, the abolitionists, right? As frustrated as they could be with Lincoln, they ultimately knew that he more often than not ruled with them. And so they were frustrated with him, but knew ultimately they had an ally. But with Johnson, they know they have someone that they're not going to be able to work with. Okay, so the radical Republicans and Johnson are going to basically go to outright war with each other over the next several years in the absence of Lincoln. And again, there's a multitude of reasons why Lincoln's assassination was tragic and unnecessary. For one, the fact that his life was taken above all else, and that his family had to deal with that, the nation had to deal with that. But even larger than that, again, the fact that he was going to have a much more moderate policy that was going to listen to both, radical Republicans, but also more moderate Republicans and Democrats. He was a master politician. He knew how to play both sides of the aisle. But Johnson, meanwhile, going to be much more to the right wing, much more in the Democratic favor this time. And again, that's going to play, is going to be a problem when it comes to really being able to bring the nation back together in a productive way. And so it was natural that this process of Reconstruction was going to take some time, but this further complicates the matters quite severely. Okay, so this is Mr. Huffman signing off. Take care. God bless. Have an awesome rest of your day.